Boom, shakalaka, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters around the world. It is your boy Chris Jewell, aka the Esoteric Noetic, aka the Chocolate Nubian Soul Brother from Ghana, West Africa. Dropping the wisdomatic truth bombs here in Melbourne, Australia. Be sure to like the video, subscribe, click on the bell, tell your friends, tell your mom, drop some comments, let us know what it is. Let's get it. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I want to talk about a topic that is going to bring about a lot of scorn, a lot of ridicule, but nonetheless, it is the most important topic if you want to understand the ancient origins of our civilization, of the world, of you. And this is the topic of the Anunnaki. Now, those that are somewhat familiar, when they hear that, they think, oh, are you one of these conspiracy theorists that think aliens came down to this planet and built all of this civilization? Yeah, bro. It's a topic that needs to be looked at earnestly, with the same kind of scientific regard we looked at when we were trying to understand the Rosetta Stone, when we were trying to understand the history of planet Earth, the ancient pyramids, which we still don't fully understand. Main reason being because the scientific community don't look at anecdotal information, mythology, the writings that have come before us, in a very serious way. We look at this as if it's mythology, when in actual fact, one of the greatest myths is that myths are just myths. And that within these myths, within these ancient writings, like the cuneiform writings of ancient Sumeria, or the Vedic scripture dating back tens of thousands of years ago, there are insights into the origin of mankind. So let's talk about the Anunnaki. Who were the Anunnaki? The word Anunnaki means those that from heaven came down. And in ancient times, when you were referring to the heavens, you were referring to the sky. You were looking at space. So essentially, we are referring to extraterrestrials. And the interesting thing is when people hear the word Anunnaki, they think we're talking about a race of aliens. No. We're simply talking about anyone that is not from this earth. In fact, it's quite possible we're talking about you, because your origins, if you have a look at the ancient writings like the Enumeralis or the many thousands of writings from different civilizations that are making reference to our origins, it becomes quite evident that there has been some intervention within the history of mankind. Now, it is not to suggest that we haven't gone through evolution, that I believe in microevolution, no doubt that we've gone through certain changes, but it is very clear, based off of the ancient records, that at some point there was some kind of intervention. This is what is written about in the Enumeralis. This is the ancient creation stories of Sumeria, modern-day Iraq. Or whether you want to go back into the stories of the Dogon, a tribe from Egypt that migrated to West Africa, Mali. Or if you want to look at the Aboriginal stories. They speak about the dream time. They speak about extraterrestrials that essentially came down and seeded the race. This is a story that you hear time and time again. And it would be one thing if it was just a story, but when you have a look at the corroborating evidence for this information, you have a look at the Enumeralis, you realize that these people are speaking about not only the architecture, the mathematics that they brought to these people, but everything. For the first of 100 things that make up a civilization, mathematics, agriculture, astronomy. I mean, these are sciences that are attributed to the Anunnaki. And of course, they go on to speak about how they created, how they seeded human beings, essentially through genetic manipulation, which we now obviously know in the 21st century is not something built of air and imagination, but something of substance. We do have the technology now to manipulate human beings. And granted, it may not be spoken about within the mainstream officially. We absolutely can hybridize human beings, manipulate them. And this is essentially what is written about in the Enumeralis, essentially how these Anunnaki, those that came down from the heavens, came here and manipulated the current species, the Neanderthals, and essentially brought about a new race called the Adama. And what's interesting is that there are a lot of references to the Bible in these writings. And that is not by chance. The reality is that the Bible, whether you're looking at the Old Testament or the New Testament, it has been obfuscated. There are various passages that have been taken from these ancient writings, from ancient Egypt, from ancient Samaria, and it's very clear to see that they were making reference to these stories. When they're speaking about the Adama, they're speaking about not a particular man, but plural, a race of people called the Adama. When they're speaking about Eden, they're speaking about a place where essentially this genetic manipulation took place. If you have a look at the Enumera list, they make reference to this. And it gets thicker and thicker. But the one thing I want people to bear in mind is that when we're speaking about the Anunnaki, it's not just in reference to the ancient Sumerian. It's referencing many, many different starfaring civilizations that have come down to this planet. Now, one of the biggest objections I hear from people is that, first of all, that extraterrestrials, they're all good. There is no way that they could have done all of this dubious stuff that we attribute them to in these writings, because any spacefaring civilization that would be able to travel all the way to planet Earth, light years, no doubt, must be so technologically advanced that they would have a higher understanding of ethics and spirituality, and there is no way they would manipulate a species. It's like that Star Trek clause, that you will not interfere in the evolution of a species, right? Well, the reality is, you have a look at human beings. You have a look at the way in which we treat lesser life forms, the animals that we share this planet with. And whereas a lot of people don't look at it as bad, it's just what we do. We essentially genetically manipulate animals. We experiment on them. We harvest them, we eat them, we milk them, we exploit them for our own benefits, and we are much more technologically sophisticated. In the same way that we treat these animals, would it not make sense that a spacefaring civilization that does not look at what they are doing as bad, but they're simply just experimenting on worms, would that not seem plausible? Because that's exactly what goes on. One of the biggest things I hear from people criticizing a lot of the stories relating to extraterrestrials, or whether it's with the abductions or whether it's with the genetic manipulation, that extraterrestrials are good, they wouldn't behave this way. When in reality, we're generalizing. And of course, if we have a look at, once again, how we treat lesser life forms, it's very evident that it's more than likely that this is exactly how they would treat us. I mean, the main thing to consider is that when we're speaking about any group, for instance, if I was to say human beings are good, that would be a dubious statement, because human beings, no doubt, they're capable of good things. They do a lot of good things, but they also commit a lot of evil offenses. They launch war on each other. They destroy civilizations. They commit genocide. And in the same way, this is how extraterrestrials behave. Some are good, no doubt. In fact, you have a look at many of the accounts, and there are many accounts of good extraterrestrials, like Enki, who was someone that decided to bestow knowledge to the human race, was someone that developed humankind. And then you have a look at other extraterrestrials, like Enlil, that went about essentially trying to ravish human beings and looked at them merely as a lower life form that should be exploited. And this is according to the ancient Sumerian records. But there are many accounts of extraterrestrials doing good and bad things. So let's just nip this in the bud. When we are talking about the Anunnaki, we're talking about groups. We're talking about spacefaring civilizations, and they're neither good or bad. Some are good, some are bad. Another thing to bear in mind, another criticism I often hear when people are trying to poke holes at this particular narrative, is that there is no way that the Anunnaki would come to planet Earth, because the theme here is that they essentially came from, well, specifically the Nibiruans from planet X. This is according to the Enumera list stories. Essentially, they came here in order to manipulate the species to mine gold. This is a common theme that you hear. And one of the objections I often hear is that there is no way these people would do something like this, because any spacefaring civilization would be so advanced, they would just use robots, right? Artificial intelligence. When the reality is that the best kind of robots are biological entities. I mean, as we're moving into the 21st century and we're finding that, look, we have this capability of creating essentially artificial intelligence, cyborgs, we're realizing that ultimately the most sophisticated AI is still human. Essentially, human beings have the power of creativity, and they can be programmed. I mean, you can augment, obviously, human biology with technology in terms of cybernetic implants and so forth. But fundamentally, the biological entity is still the most sophisticated way of doing things. Now, of course, there are many downsides. I mean, you have a look at the pros and cons. You have a look at, let's say, some kind of cybernetic or completely artificial intelligent being, no biological aspects, and yes, they're no doubt can be able to do certain things that human beings can't. They can be physically stronger. But when you are looking at doing something that is more nuanced, more intricate, more creative, the biological entity is still the better choice. And this is why the ancient Sumerians, at least in reference to the Enuma Elish, actually decided to, rather than using robots, which by no means, you have a look at the records, and they definitely had this technology, they made the decision to use biological entities to essentially manipulate the species of the time, the Neanderthals, manipulate them into a type of species known as the Adama that would be proficient in doing certain work. And there were other reasons for this. They were more controllable. I mean, there are obviously problems if you have some kind of artificial intelligent being that perhaps becomes so sophisticated that it doesn't listen to the directions of its master. And strangely enough, this is the problem they actually found. Eventually, the human beings that had been manipulated became so sophisticated, they were too advanced that essentially they decided to free themselves and war on their enslavers. But anyway, I digress. One of the things I want to speak about finally, just in regards to the Anunnaki, is the relation to religion, the relation to biblical scripture. One of the reasons a lot of people are very apprehensive about buying into a lot of this information, bearing in mind this is not something built of air and imagination. These are texts that are found within civilizations, every civilization, speaking about this specifically. And it's not one of these things where a lot of people say that, oh, look, there are different interpretations of this. No, you can actually go and read these texts for yourself. They've been translated, but you can actually translate this for yourself. It's not that hard. You can go on various websites and you can have a look at the actual words from the cuneiform writings, and you can come up with your own interpretations. And they're all speaking relatively about the same thing, about these gods, the Anunnaki that essentially came down. One of the criticisms people have, though, is that this can't be real because I believe in the Bible, I believe in God. This information is not denying the existence of a supreme creator, not by any stretch of the imagination. In the same way that we ourselves have reached a high level of advancement and sophistication, and we can do great things, we still understand that there are powers higher than us. There are principles within this universe that govern things that we cannot fully comprehend. And in the same way, this applies to the extraterrestrials. These beings weren't gods. Granted, we looked at them as being gods because of the capability that they had. But in the same way that we are extremely advanced now, and if we were to discover a different planet that didn't have the same level of sophistication, these people would look at us as gods. It's simply technology. It's not denying the existence of a god. You can still keep your spiritual belief in a higher power, but the idea of denying science, the idea of denying facts because they don't coincide with what you believe, that's unwise and stupid. And it's just something I would invite people to do when they're looking at this information. Realize that when you're reading things like the Bible, you're finding that a lot of this information has been censored out. If you have a look at the book of Enoch, if you have a look at many of the Bible passages, they're making reference to, without a doubt, extraterrestrials. And it's clear that we're also referring to more than just one God here in the Bible. There are references to a God that seems like he is power hungry, Yaldabaoth, that essentially says things like, you shall have no God before me. Does this sound like a beneficent God, or does this sound more like a conquering, space-fearing entity that essentially wants power? Because this is essentially what was written about in the Innumeralists. So it's just something to bear in mind, that when you were reading a lot of these religious texts, they are taking passages from these ancient writings, like the Innumeralists, and the reality, the truth in regards to the origins of mankind are much deeper than what you were being told. Ladies and gentlemen, freaks and geeks, brothers and sisters around the world, that is just a short insight into the realm of the Anunnaki, extraterrestrials, and the ancient origins of mankind. Drop us some comments below. Let us know if you want to hear more about this information. Until next time, peace out, keep it real. Surya Namaskara, Namaste. Chris Jewell signing out. Kisses, hugs, and belly rubs.
What is liberty?
What the? Who says you can't build muscle on a vegan diet?
What's it like being a hottie in the vegan community?
There are no political solutions, only technological ones.
The economics of the system don't allow multiple competing systems to survive.
Engineering, technology, these arts of humanity, they are magic.